Welcome to the One Question Leadership Podcast. My name is Randall Richmond, and I'm the Director of Athletics here at Kent State University and a proud graduate of the NCAA Charles Wickham Leadership Institute. The Leadership Institute helped me refine who I was as a man well before focusing on who I was as an administrator. Within the program, I developed lifelong friendships, colleagues, and confidants who helped me discover my true purpose in this profession, which is to be a transformational leader that has a positive impact on people's lives well beyond sports. And as the great orator Big Sean often says, the energy you give is what you manifest. Peace.
Greetings, this is Ty Brown and welcome to the One Question Leadership Podcast, where we highlight executive and organizational leadership. Be sure to follow us on Twitter and Instagram at 1Q Leadership. Our guest today is Troy Austin. Troy is the Deputy Director of Athletics for Competitive Excellence, People, and Culture at Duke University. Greetings, Troy. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me, Ty. Good to catch up with you again.
Yeah, I'm glad you're here. Now, you've been at Duke since 2018. This is your second role there. I guess you got a promotion about a year and a half ago to that Deputy Director of Athletics role, which I think is significant. Spent 10 years as Director of Athletics at Longwood University, and early in your career, you did some work in marketing, roughly 21 years in college athletics. So you have a wealth of experience in terms of being in college athletics, but also being in a leadership role in college athletics. 10 years is a pretty good tenure. And so that's a very unique perspective on leadership and on college athletics. I wonder, how did that, in the time since you joined Duke, how did that help you in terms of supporting Kevin White, former athletic director, now Nina King, and really not just the leadership, but those who you work with on campus?
I'd probably say two areas. The experience really helps you with anticipating things. Let's step back and just talk about some of the major challenges in being a director of athletics. I really think two things that you have to be good at, and they both revolve around decision making. It's decision making with people. It's putting the right people in the right place. It's unfortunately making good, sometimes fortunately, sometimes unfortunately, making people decisions on whether somebody should stay or go or be elevated. So I felt like in this role, I could help with that. And I was purposely brought in to help with human resources and that aspect of things. But then there's also decision making around budgetary items or really just problem solving in general, which usually ends up being a budgetary decision. So going back to anticipation, I've been able to use my experience to help Kevin and Nina, as you talked about, with my team versus as much as pushing them on items. I can provide advice. Kevin, he'd been around so much. He sees the ball, he sees the plays happening before it develops, but the team he assigned me to and made me responsible for, I feel like I could help them in anticipating problems and anticipating the necessary people decisions that need to be made. The second part I'd say is empathy and being empathetic to just their role. And again, that works as much down throughout the area I'm responsible for as it does for Kevin and Nina and supporting them. But and the example I would use there, or something I remind myself in that situation is before I became an AD, I was in marketing and development at Longwood. And I remember thinking to myself, well, why didn't AD do this? Or, we're all coaching from the sideline in a lot of ways. We're all couch coaches. So when I became AD and you realize the matrix of pitfalls and opportunities you're working in between and making decisions, you come to realize like, oh, that's why he did this. So I try to use that empathy in those moments where even I may not know everything they're dealing with, but if we're near Board of Trustees week and there's I'm sure Nina and Kevin, they're thinking about getting ready for that week and interacting with board of trustees and then, you know, sometimes somebody may think, well, why didn't they go to X, Y, and Z while they're over here? You know, so it's hard for them to be everywhere. It's hard for us who aren't in that chair to understand what political elements they're dealing with and making a decision. I feel like I at least try to be empathetic of that situation and relate that to staff I work with, and really in supporting them and providing them an outlet to talk through some of those aspects and vent in a lot of circumstances. Just knowing that the AD chair, if you let it, could make you feel lonely. I try to lean on my empathetic side so they're never lonely.
Yeah, I think that's important. What I find interesting in what you said is you think about decision points, right? I mentioned to you offline that I'm working on my MBA, and one of the things we're learning is about like a decision tree, right? Which includes probability of, you know what I mean? You make a decision on what provides the most value based on the probability that these things will happen. And I wonder about your approach to that, even, you know, when you were in the chair or now understanding you never know what's on the boss, you know, you never know what's on the head coach's mind in terms of why they made a decision. Like you said, they may have so many other decision points that they got to consider while they do it. While to us from the outside looking in, it's like, you should have just went with B instead of A, because it made way more sense. But I wonder about that aspect of input into decision points when you were in the chair, right? And then I guess now, like you're saying, you're trying to provide that for the people in the chair there at Duke.
Yeah, that's definitely the case. And at least what I try to stay conscious of. Sometimes the outcome doesn't always match up, but that's all you get judged on. I mean,
yeah, that makes sense.
You know what I'm saying?
Sports,
right?
I
mean, and look, that's one of the things I acknowledge as a value. You know, we're in a W&L industry, so people are going to judge you on W&Ls, and you know, it's not fair, but don't worry about fair, because so. But if you stay consistent in your process and, you know, get as much good data as you can, generally that leads to consistently positive outcomes. In terms of good data, I try to be a person to push the thought beyond trying to get the general outcome and being mindful of the collateral effects of a decision that may, I want to say, harm the outcome. Does that make sense? You see where I'm going with that?
Yeah, that makes it. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's on there, like what you're talking about is why we see a lot of people getting out of college athletics. Like, I mean, right? You can gather as much information and feel like you made the best decision, but in the end, like you said, the results of the decision or the perspective of other people on that decision, all they see is the W or the L at the end. So let's talk about things that we can control, right? In terms of the role you're in, competitive excellence, people, and culture. My assumption is based on the title that people are your first priority in terms of athletics, right? Student athletes, the staff, and all the culture, right, includes it all. Talk about that specific role in terms of the area that you are contributing to organizational success there at Duke in terms of perspective of culture and organizational behavior.
One of the things I think I've worked to do is try to uplift the voice for those who are from probably underrepresented populations. And I don't mean just from a race or gender standpoint. I mean from an organizational position standpoint. When I first started, I oversee an area that is really focused on student athlete welfare and health, and spent my first 2 months just meeting with each of those people individually, because I feel like these people are touching the student athletes directly. So, you know, we're talking about athletic trainers, sport performance coaches, nutritionists, our actual behavioral health people. You know, I want to know, one, how they feel, because a lot of times that they relay that to the student athletes, whether they're having a good experience or bad experience, if they're that frontline worker. And then two, I tried to surmise from them what they're hearing from student athletes, and coaches in some respects. So, I mean, it's a lot of active listening, trying to be mindful of who we say we want to be and how we're actually doing that in terms of our actions and our policies and procedures and those type of things. And it's really connecting those two things.
You said making sure that the underrepresented populations have a voice. And by underrepresented populations, you're talking about positions in college athletics, right? That may not be. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and so underrepresented, they're the ones that aren't always in the meetings.
That's what I would. Yeah.
The decision making meetings. So, I mean, most departments have a senior staff, they have executive staff, they have a head coaches group. In those meetings, assistant coaches aren't heavily represented, or the assistant director of communications. So, I mean, I really feel like part of my responsibility, and I admit too, during COVID, I kind of graded myself lower on this, is getting out and about and getting to understand who those people are and how they view things and how their experience, what their experience is like. And now I feel like I'm at a position in the team I work with in that, both on the student side and the staff side, they work to do the same thing, because I know, it's not going to be a one person job, and I won't relate directly to everybody, but, really work to try to listen more and work to try to make sure those groups feel like they are heard, even if it seems like something that may be trivial. I do think one of the keys to a positively impactful culture is one where staff feel engaged, and engaged just isn't being talked to, it's being heard.
Yeah, I think that's excellent, actually, right? You also said something to the effect of, if these underrepresented populations in terms of staff, if they have some type of issue they're dealing with, or if they're struggling, you said that they will tell the students. So you almost hear it from the students too.
Yeah. I wouldn't say tell, but
you can see it in the outcome of how they're.
Yeah. If you're not enjoying, so from my experience, if somebody is miserable in their position, so there's a gray zone too. There's a spectrum. There's really loving their experience. There's where the bell curve is, and then if someone's miserable in their experience and
2 or 3 standard deviations out.
Yeah. I found that the students tend to hear that, and almost they build off that a little bit.
And it can affect their experience too, right? In terms of the students.
Yeah.
I find that interesting, giving a voice to, for the lack of a better word, the voiceless, right? Because they're not in these leadership meetings. They're not in these meetings where the decisions are made. And actually, these are the positions where, while things may look good in mid-level management, things may look good in the executive level management, but there might be a whole lot of turnover in these underrepresented populations because they may not be happy. So giving that group a voice, actually, like as you're saying, helps with the culture.
And then one thing I would want to add, I mean, it takes work, and I'm nowhere near where I think Duke can be. But I'd also add to that, I feel like Duke is in a really good place. And, I'm biased. Why I love Duke is that we already had that inset in our community and our culture. And I want to build off that and accentuate that and expand upon that. I think one of the things that, as we continue to grow, it becomes a little bit more challenging, because not only are we growing by numbers, we're growing geographically, and but I do think that's one of the things people appreciate about Duke, and that's what I've always appreciated about Duke. From the time I was an intern to now, I had people who made me feel welcome, and again, they wanted to hear from me. So now is my time to come back and continue to build off that. And it's a tough challenge, but it's something that really excites me and energizes me in this job.
All right, which is important. I'll ask one more question along that line of thinking is, I'm interested in how you evaluate. How do you evaluate your success at doing the things you just spelled out for us?
Yeah, that goes back to it's a W&L business, right?
Right. There you go. Right.
So I've done the quantitative and qualitative things. We've done survey work for the department, and at least I do now, and always open to more discussion about it and getting more ideas on it. But at least starting out with what has been identified as a major problem by a concentration of people, and then the ability to rectify that, or to come up with a solution that matches the desired outcome. And so I'm talking a lot in generality. So let's take social justice discussions. And I think a lot of departments had to self-reflect on where they were in 2020 and what they were doing. And Duke was no different from those. But I do feel as though we've begun more discussion about it. And really, you kind of use those anecdotal interactions of people telling you, hey, this is really great. I hadn't thought about this. This is what I'm doing with my team now. So you're looking for growth and in positive ways, but you also have to be honest with yourself about where you might have missed an opportunity. And that cuts into your overall scoring. I mean, it's a continuous grading system where you're looking to keep building more opportunities and around social justice, building more discussion opportunities, but also understanding where we may be missing the mark and trying to improve upon that. So,
yeah, I find what you're saying interesting because in terms of culture work, I guess, right, to put it into a category, there's a heavy qualitative aspect to it in terms of understanding, are we successful at what we're trying to create and maintain here? But in order to quantify that, you almost would have to do assessments incessantly, right? To see how people feel now and how they prefer things to be, and constantly assessing, we've done this, so now let's assess, that kind of thing. And in terms of athletics, do you even have time to do that type of, constant.
Well, I do think that's what makes this position necessary, or my position. At least maybe I'm telling people that. So
to justify your existence.
To help. Let's be out. But so a lot of times you have to come to agreement, and this is being an AD, particularly at a small school where we may not necessarily have been looking to win national championships or conference championships in all our sports. So you have to decide what success is for you, and by you, I mean the department, and you have to be rigorous in assessing those goals. Like again, staying with social justice, to say we have a talk every month, or we've opened up a talk every month and we were successful. I mean, that's no goal at all. Right. So you have to set some targets that are stretch, but achievable, and then pursue those targets doggedly. I mean, one of the things we're doing now is building out a strategic plan, and we're working to get as much feedback from throughout the department about what the desired targets are. And I feel like once we submit that, that's why it takes a whole year to do. Once we submit that, then we chase those down as a department, and we'll know, we should be able to say to ourselves, okay, we did 80% of this, 90% of this. Some of these targets are weighted heavier than others, and after a short time frame, we should be able to feel good about ourselves, or no, we still got a lot of work to do. I think as long as you work thoughtfully and inclusively to develop your success targets, I think that, as much as anything, has positive impact on your culture and gives you a more than reasonable grading metrics with which to evaluate yourself And when I say yourself, I mean the department on. And that's been my approach since getting in the seat is, okay, you have, what's the scientific method? You have an idea and you have a theory, and then you test out that theory and you discover, okay, that here's some new information, here's some new data of which to build on. And I think that's the approach I use with assist in building a culture, because I definitely don't believe it like I'm doing it myself.
But thinking about that, is that the framework you used at Longwood in terms of we had to set our specific goals because we're probably not chasing the national championship every year? But is that the framework you use in terms of goal setting and strategic planning? And
yeah. So, when I first started there, we were transitioning to Division I. And we didn't have conference affiliation, a little different time. But so the goal wasn't make an NCAA tournament. The goal was, look, we got to get a conference. and so we had to, so some of our other goals were complementary to one of our bigger goals, getting a conference. It was building an infrastructure that made us attractive as a fellow conference member. So then once we got in the conference, we decided, okay, this is the type of department we want to be known as. We sloped a good deal of resources towards select sports based on what we wanted to do as a department, what we wanted to do as an institution, and then set relative goals for each of our units around the grand plan and the grand scheme. And then as you achieve your goal, you can reset your goals. And that was kind of the step-by-step process I used at Longwood. I feel like it could be applied at Duke. And I know that's one of the things, Nina is working on now, and that will play a lot into where I put my energy. She's already said diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging will be a major component moving forward in Duke athletics. I mean, that's really building off what Kevin did. So that's why we went ahead and started that process of collectively developing targets and goals in that area. But I know she's also planning on a strategic plan that outlines, targets and goals in some of the other areas. So I'll be able to use that to inform my energy and how we target our culture and our behaviors and our values.
Yeah, I think this is excellent information, which is interesting to me because culture is kind of where my brain tends to lead me towards, right? Culture and organizational development and change management, those types of things. I asked this final question and then we'll wrap. And I think it kind of ties into the nuances of leadership, right? It's a ongoing, continuing education for everyone who is a leader, or wants to be a leader, or has ever been a leader. Even for someone like you who's been 10 years in the chair, 20 years in the industry. I wonder about the areas of leadership that you are focusing on now as you continue to evolve as a leader. What are you learning or what are you focusing on improving on, I guess is the question.
One of the things I'm learning of myself as I get older is I'm thankful for my experience, but I've really been working to try to not let that bias me when reflecting on new truths, if that makes sense.
You might need to expound a little bit. On that.
So experience allows you to play off a similar situation in the past to make a decision or react based on a present day circumstance. But there's been a paradigm shift in terms of student athletes' views on things and the general perception of college athletics, and so there's been a paradigm shift that you have to acknowledge. So if I was to rely solely on what I did 10 years ago, it may not be as effective or honestly could put me in a bad situation. So it's really for me about continuing to seek growth and keep staying hungry for knowledge, not just about book information, but about people and how generations evolve. And I think if I rely on solely on my experience, that will bias me and essentially create a blind spot for how times have evolved and changed. And I think, even watching Coach K from a distance, from how he was when I was here as a student and talking to, I knew guys on the team, and how he is now and talking to those same guys on the team and where he's made adjustments. He's not allowed his experience to overly bias him or create too big a blind spot on what is kind of a new truth.
You hit on a few things that tie to the person, but also to the organization. Obviously, your experiences make up who you are, the decisions you make, how you move, because your body is trained in those habits and those psychological pathways. But when you're talking about looking towards the future, if you get caught up in how you react to your past experiences, you may not be successful in the future, because the future does not probably operate on the same.
It's dynamic. You hit on exactly. This is where, that highlights where I had to work on my presentation skills. But no, you're right. The future's dynamic. And while your experience can definitely help you, particularly in, how you make decisions, who you have with you when you're making decisions, and, where to get valuable data and making decisions. Don't forget, things change. And you have to account for that in the moment of your decision. I mean, I just think it's so important that you stay a bit nimble the older you get.
It's almost as if, which is counterintuitive to what we know about like uncles and aunties who are so stuck in their ways, right? But it's almost as if the things you're applying are also can be applied to strategic planning, right? Strategic planning, if we get caught up in how things were, how can we plan for the future? So we have to be dynamic in our planning for this, especially a future that you have no idea how things are going to unfold when you talk about.
So one of the things that hit me as we think about our work environment, and we've had a few discussions about this amongst our exec staff, we went through 2 years where we showed we can do some of this work from home. And we have employees now coming into the market or who are new to the market who did this work at home. So now when you ask them to come to the office and they say, well, I'd like to spend some of this time working from home, should we be in a position to say, no, this work can only be done at home? I mean, we know that's not the case, but now there's an expectation that, hey, I want to be able to work from home for some people. Now, I don't feel like that. I enjoy being able to come to the office, but I'm living off of experiences where I was kind of walking around on a coffee break or something like that, interacting with people.
That's not their lived experience, right?
Yeah, that's my lived experience, and I think it did help the culture. But now I think helping our culture moving forward, you have to be open to those new working dynamics, because people were forced to live in those working dynamics, and some found that they liked it. You look at one profession that is burgeoning in creative media. A lot of those folks feel like, hey, I can sometimes cover a game from, I can put together a creative tweet from the house as much as I could sitting in a cubicle where I have somebody yelling over the top of me. So, aside from going to the game, why do I need to be sitting here? That's a good question. And we need to forecast that as we lay out our working environment.
I'll ask one. I got this one final thought here, and we can go. It's been a long conversation.
Enjoy it.
Something you said to me, I had a thought, right? You talk about your experiences and you can't react the same way. From a leadership perspective, and this is a thought that's just coming up in my brain as I am letting it out of my mouth, so it may not come out clear.
That's how I work too. So
yeah, the notion of values, right? Decisions rooted in values in terms of who I am or who we are as an organization. It's almost like your experiences helped you sharpen your ability to make decisions around your values, so that now as the future is going, it's not the experience that you're really basing your decision on. It's kind of the values, so that will allow you to maneuver and evolve with wherever the future takes you, because the values are sharpened based on that. But I don't know if that's clear, and it's not.
Yeah, no, that's clear. I mean, I think you hit on what I talked about earlier. Sometimes we fixate too much on that outcome, and really it's the process and how to values evolve through going through these various processes and, you know, the trials and tribulations of life and the experience I gained. And I learned about myself in that. I took time to learn about myself and what's important to me and how I can best function. And I kind of put that stake in the ground and said, this is what I'm going to value. And I think that's what organizations do as well. And then you have to be, you know, I talked about the nimbleness of Coach K earlier. His values haven't changed during that time. He's probably evolved, and those have evolved through time, and he stayed committed to it and rooted in it. And his teachings have been rooted in that. It doesn't dictate his actions, it informs his decisions.
Yeah, I think that's excellent. Well, Troy, this has been an excellent conversation. I really appreciate you joining me in terms of almost a philosophical, talk on some of the things I'm definitely interested in. It sounds like you're interested in too. So I appreciate you joining us on the One Question Leadership Podcast.
Yeah, I love it. Love thinking through it.
That was Troy Austin. He's the Deputy Director of Athletics for Competitive Excellence, People, and Culture at Duke University. And of course, I am Ty Brown with One Question. And keep in mind, the role of a leader is to create and maintain an environment that people want to be a part of. And as always, be better tomorrow than you are today. This episode of the One Question Leadership Podcast is produced by Spades Media Group, solving problems using creative leadership.